There comes a moment in every relationship with a narcissist when all their usual tactics have failed, when every manipulation strategy has been exposed, when every emotional weapon in their arsenal has been neutralized by your growing awareness and strength. It's in this moment of complete powerlessness that they reach for their final card, their most devastating psychological weapon, the one trick they save for when they have absolutely nothing left to lose.
What I'm about to reveal isn't just another manipulation tactic. It's the nuclear option of narcissistic abuse, the psychological equivalent of burning down the entire relationship rather than losing control of it. If you've ever wondered why a narcissist's behavior becomes so inexplicably cruel and destructive right before they disappear from your life, if you've experienced that final devastating blow that seemed designed not just to hurt you but to destroy your very sense of reality, then you need to understand what Carl Jung would recognize as the ultimate expression of the shadow self unleashed. Hit that like button if you're ready to confront this difficult truth, and subscribe if you want to continue this journey of understanding the darkest aspects of human psychology. Because what we're exploring today will fundamentally change how you see narcissistic behavior patterns. The last dirty trick, the final manipulation that narcissists deploy when they've lost all other forms of control, is what I call reality annihilation through identity assassination. This isn't simple character assassination or reputation destruction, though it includes those elements. This is a systematic, calculated attempt to make you question not just what happened in the relationship, but who you are as a person, what you're capable of, and whether your own memories and perceptions can be trusted at all. Jung understood that our sense of self is constructed through what he called the transcendent function, the ongoing integration of conscious awareness with unconscious content, the continuous process of making meaning from our experiences and maintaining coherence in our identity. The narcissist's final trick is designed to fracture this transcendent function, to create such chaos in your internal world that you lose the ability to trust your own psychological processes. Here's how it typically unfolds. When the narcissist realizes that you're no longer susceptible to their usual manipulation tactics, when they see that you've developed what Jung would call differentiated consciousness, the ability to distinguish between their projections and your own reality, they don't simply intensify their existing strategies. Instead, they shift into what can only be described as psychological scorched earth tactics. They begin systematically attacking not just your behavior or your choices, but your fundamental capacity for perception, memory, and rational thought. This final assault often begins with what I call selective truth weaponization. The narcissist will take real events, actual conversations, genuine moments from your relationship, but they'll present them with such distorted context and manipulated framing that you begin to question whether you remember anything correctly. They're not creating entirely false narratives. That would be too easy for your rational mind to dismiss. Instead, they're taking pieces of truth and weaving them into a reality so twisted that you start doubting your own sanity. For example, they might reference a fight you had 6 months ago, but they'll describe your behavior in that fight using language that makes you sound mentally unstable, emotionally abusive, or completely irrational. They'll quote things you actually said, but stripped of all context, presented as evidence of your fundamental character flaws. They'll remind you of mistakes you made, but they'll frame these mistakes as proof that you're the real problem in the relationship, that everything they did was actually a reasonable response to your instability. The psychological sophistication of this tactic is breathtaking. They're not asking you to believe obvious lies. They're asking you to accept their interpretation of events you both experienced. And because there are kernels of truth embedded in their distorted narrative, your rational mind can't simply dismiss everything they're saying. You find yourself thinking, well, I did say that, or I did react that way, and from there it's a short step to wondering if maybe their interpretation is correct, if maybe you are the one who's been wrong about everything. But the selective truth weaponization is just the beginning. The next phase of reality annihilation involves what Jung would recognize as systematic shadow projection on steroids. And the narcissist doesn't just project their own negative qualities onto you. They project their entire psychopathology. Every manipulation they employed, every cruel thing they did, every boundary they violated, every lie they told,
All of this becomes evidence of your character, your behavior, your psychological dysfunction.
They'll accuse you of being manipulative while describing in detail all the ways you supposedly manipulated them. And the methods they describe are exactly the methods they used on you. They'll claim you're emotionally abusive while painting vivid pictures of your abusive behavior that mirror their own actions with uncanny precision. They'll say you're incapable of real love while describing all the ways you failed to love them properly. Failures that sound suspiciously like their own emotional limitations. This isn't simple projection anymore. This is what I call complete psychological identity theft. They're not just refusing to acknowledge their own shadow. They're claiming that their shadow is actually your core identity. They're taking everything they refuse to face about themselves and making it the defining narrative of who you are as a person. The devastating effectiveness of this tactic lies in its timing and its comprehensiveness. It comes at the moment when you're most vulnerable, when you've just begun to see clearly, when you've started to trust your own perceptions, when you're beginning to believe that maybe you deserve better treatment. And it doesn't attack just one aspect of your self-concept. It attacks everything: your intelligence, your emotional stability, your capacity for love, your trustworthiness, your sanity, your fundamental worth as a human being. What makes this particularly cruel is that the narcissist has spent months or years studying your deepest insecurities, your core fears about yourself, your most painful self-doubts. They know exactly which accusations will hit hardest, which interpretations of your behavior will trigger your greatest shame, which aspects of your personality you're most uncertain about. They've been collecting this information throughout the entire relationship, not to help you heal or grow, but to use as weapons in this final assault. The third component of reality annihilation is what I call evidence manufacturing through emotional terrorism. This is where the narcissist doesn't just reinterpret past events. They actively create new situations designed to provoke reactions from you that they can then use as evidence of your instability or dysfunction. They'll say something so outrageous, so hurtful, so completely divorced from reality that any normal person would respond with anger, confusion, or emotional distress. Then they'll point to your emotional response as proof that you're unstable, overreactive, or mentally unwell. They might send you a message claiming that you've been stalking them, harassing them, or threatening them, accusations so absurd that your immediate response is shock and indignation. But your shock becomes evidence of your explosive temper. Your attempts to defend yourself become proof of your inability to take responsibility. Your confusion about where these accusations are coming from becomes evidence of your disconnect from reality. This is psychological terrorism in its purest form. They're creating artificial situations specifically designed to generate trauma responses in you, then using those trauma responses as evidence that you're the one who's psychologically damaged. It's like setting someone on fire and then pointing to their screaming as evidence that they're mentally unstable. Jung would recognize this as a complete perversion of what he called active imagination, the healthy psychological process of creating meaning from experience. The narcissist is actively imagining scenarios, interpretations, and narratives that serve their need to maintain psychological dominance, but they're presenting these imaginative constructions as objective reality. They're not just lying, they're creating an entire alternative universe where they're the victim and you're the perpetrator, and they're demanding that you accept this universe as the true version of events. The fourth element of this final dirty trick is social reality manipulation through strategic disclosure. The narcissist doesn't keep their twisted version of events private. They systematically share it with anyone who will listen, but they do so in ways that make you look maximally bad while making themselves look like the reasonable hurt party just trying to make sense of what happened to them. They'll reach out to your friends, your family, your colleagues, anyone who knows you, and they'll share carefully crafted versions of your behavior that paint you as unstable, abusive, or delusional. They'll use language that sounds reasonable and concerned. They're worried about your mental health. They're trying to understand what went wrong. They're hoping you get the help you need. But embedded in this concerned language is a narrative that systematically destroys your reputation and social support network. The genius of this approach is that it doesn't sound like typical narcissistic rage or obvious manipulation. It sounds like a genuinely confused and hurt person trying to process a difficult situation. People who hear these accounts don't immediately recognize them as character assassination because they're delivered with such apparent sincerity and concern. Meanwhile, if you try to defend yourself or share your own version of events, you often end up sounding defensive, angry, or obsessed with the relationship. The narcissist's calm, concerned demeanor contrasts sharply with your emotional distress, and this contrast becomes additional evidence that their version of events might be accurate. They've set up a situation where your truth-telling looks like instability, and their manipulation looks like mature processing of a difficult relationship. The final component of reality annihilation is what I call future contamination through preemptive strike narratives. The narcissist doesn't just try to rewrite the past. They try to control your future by creating narratives about what you're likely to do next. They'll warn people that you might become vindictive, that you might spread lies about them, that you might become obsessed with the relationship or unable to move on. These predictions serve multiple purposes. First, they create a framework where anything you do to heal, process, or move forward can be interpreted as evidence of the dysfunction they've predicted. If you go to therapy, you're obsessed with the relationship. If you talk to friends about what happened, you're spreading lies. If you take time to heal, you're unable to move on. If you try to establish no contact, you're being vindictive. Second, these preemptive narratives isolate you from potential sources of support by warning people about your supposed future behavior. People become hesitant to listen to your experiences or offer support because they've been primed to see any discussion of the relationship as evidence of your inability to let go or your tendency toward drama. Third, and perhaps most insidiously, these future contamination narratives often become self-fulfilling prophecies. When you're isolated from support, when your reality has been systematically undermined, when every attempt to heal or process is interpreted as evidence of dysfunction, you may indeed become more distressed, more confused, more desperate for validation. And this increased distress then becomes retroactive evidence that the narcissist's assessment of your character was accurate all along. Jung would recognize this as a complete perversion of what he called prospective thinking, the healthy psychological function that helps us anticipate and prepare for future possibilities. The narcissist is using prospective thinking not to genuinely anticipate your likely behavior based on accurate understanding of your character, but to create limiting narratives that constrain your future options and contaminate your potential relationships. The reason this final dirty trick is so devastatingly effective is that it attacks the very foundation of psychological health. Your ability to trust your own perceptions, maintain a coherent sense of identity, and form meaningful connections with others. It's designed to leave you not just hurt or angry, but fundamentally confused about reality itself. This is why recovery from this level of psychological warfare isn't just about healing from trauma. It's about what Jung called reconstruction of the transcendent function, rebuilding your capacity to integrate experience, maintain psychological coherence, and trust your own inner knowing. It's about recognizing that when someone systematically attacks your sanity, your memory, your character, and your relationships all at once, they're revealing something profound about their own psychological landscape. The narcissist's final dirty trick is actually a confession. It's an admission that they cannot tolerate your independence, your clarity, your strength, or your capacity for genuine relationship. It's a revelation that their entire sense of self depends on maintaining psychological dominance over others, and when that dominance is threatened, they would rather destroy everything than face their own inner emptiness. Understanding this dynamic doesn't minimize the devastation it causes, but it can help you recognize that the assault on your reality says nothing about who you are and everything about who they are. Your healing journey involves not just recovering from their final attack, but reclaiming your right to trust your own experience, to maintain your own version of events, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than psychological dominance. The path forward involves what Jung would call conscious suffering, the willingness to feel the full impact of what was done to you without losing faith in your own perceptions or your capacity for healthy relationship. It means rebuilding your sense of self not in reaction to their accusations, but through connection with your authentic inner experience and with people who have earned the right to know your story through consistent, trustworthy behavior over time. If you've experienced this final devastating manipulation, please know that your confusion, your pain, and your struggle to make sense of what happened are normal responses to an abnormal level of psychological warfare. Your healing is possible, your reality is valid, and your strength is real, regardless of what narratives were created to convince you otherwise. Share your thoughts in the comments about which aspect of this final manipulation resonated most with your experience, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of recovery and resilience. Remember, understanding these dynamics isn't about becoming cynical. It's about developing the discernment to recognize authentic relationship and the courage to trust your own experience, even when others try to convince you that your reality isn't real.